we're moving through this at a rapid rate of knots, and we got plenty to talk about here with wrapping up UFC 248, which Israel Adesanya, this was his, depending on how you look at it, because he won the interim title bout against Kelvin Gastelum and then defended that bout and won the overall, I think it's middleweight, I'm not too sure off the top of my head. He won the bout against Robert Whittaker. So I view this, like, I just follow what Israel Adesanya says, and he reckons it was his second title defense because he won the bout against Kelvin Gastelum. That's happy days. This was Israel Adesanya's second title defense against Yoel Romero, who this is a interesting fight to digest because it was a massive non-event, but when you're trying to isolate why this was a non-event, from my perspective, and it'll be interesting to get your perspective, knowing what you know about fighting sports and pressing the issue, throwing strikes and moving forward and all that good stuff. Israel Adesanya did nothing wrong. He came out to fight, and Yoel Romero showed absolutely no intention of engaging with Adesanya, which can be viewed as a good tactical decision because especially the first minute or 2 minutes of any Israel Adesanya fight, he is going to set up his traps. So he's throwing his fakes and feints and legitimate strikes almost with the sole intention of creating a reaction and reading from that reaction. He's not necessarily trying to land strikes. He's just trying to throw stuff and scope out what his opponent is doing, process that information, and store it away and set up more traps and get into the fight. He is kind of like a counter striker, but not really. He has elements of that, but he's also just throwing stuff to process how he can be successful, whether counter striking or whether pressing the issue. So from a Yoel Romero standpoint, the best thing he could do, was to do nothing. You can see in those opening exchanges, if you can call them that, Adesanya is doing all his little movements. He's doing all his little twists and moving in and out and side to side. Yoel Romero isn't biting on anything. So he's not giving Adesanya anything to work with. Then Adesanya got caught with a heavy left hand, an overhand left, which Adesanya said from that point on, and it's easy to see this, it's easy to process this ourselves. If you're going to engage Yoel Romero when he's not coming to you, you're putting yourself in serious damage and danger, because Yoel Romero, at any stage, he's going to explode, and if he catches you, it might hurt. So Adesanya kind of pressed the issue while Yoel Romero wasn't doing anything, but he quickly decided that wasn't the best way to win this fight. The best way to win this fight was to pick Romero apart from his range and distance as best as he could. So I'm interested to get your thoughts here, Wildcard, having watched the fight, because Adesanya literally did nothing wrong. He won the fight. He dealt with a unique challenge from an opponent, and if you're Yoel Romero, you're coming into a title fight and you're expecting to win by doing nothing. That's not going to happen. However, the joy here is that Adesanya got the win. He found a way to win in crazy circumstances. And when you're it's like the best teams in in a football or rugby league context, they find a way to win. They win 8-6 on a rainy Saturday night, or on a football they win 1-0, or they hold on to a 1-1 draw. Whatever it is, the best teams, the best athletes, when the situation isn't in their favor, they somehow find a way to win or get a favorable result, and that's what Israel Adesanya did here. So from my perspective, the way this fight played out, the responsibility for the blame perhaps falls on Romero's shoulders, Adesanya, and then in reviewing the fight, Adesanya showed a completely different way to win his fights, because if we go back to Castellum, that was a 5-round war. If you're going to be a champion, you have to show that you can go 5 rounds in hellish circumstances. He did that. Then he completely outclassed Robert Whittaker. Skills, precision, speed, martial arts at its finest. Come against Romero, and he had to grit his teeth and figure out the conundrum that was that fight, and just somehow claw your way to a victory, which he did. So, to wrap that little rant up, the reason that fight was that way, from my perspective, was because Yoel Romero, Israel Adesanya didn't do anything wrong, and in review, this is good for, this is a good moment for Adesanya to show that he can win different ways, and now he's got a fantastic track record of winning different ways against the best in his division.
Which is always a important feather to have in your bow if you want to be not just a champion, but a sustained champion. And I think that's probably something just quietly that Joseph Parker was not able to do. Before I add in my own 2 cents here, just to classify some things, and I'm sure there's probably be a few people listening who would also be interested, because the scoring in UFC is the same as boxing, right? Where it's 10 points for winning the round, 9 points for being the next guy, and you, I assume, drop points for, I don't know. In boxing, you also would then lose an additional point for either referee penalties, so hitting below the belt or something, or dirty play, or you lose a point as well for getting knocked down. I'm pretty sure that's the same in UFC. I'm not sure about knockdowns and whatever, but how do they actually score it? Is it just straight whoever has the most clean strikes is the one who is awarded the round kind of thing for the judges?
There are people who are far more embedded in UFC and MMA than myself who this is a contentious point of discussion. So,
right,
it's I would prefer just to have no clue. And because everyone tries to figure out the scoring, it's octagon control, it's whether, because if you take someone down and that takedown doesn't actually lead to damage or lead to a submission, do you score points for the takedown? And so it's an absolute shit show, to be honest, wildcard. And when stuff is an absolute shit show, my preference is always just to ignore the shit show and cop whatever happens. And unfortunately for the athletes, it's a shit show. But in trying to, it's an absolute nightmare trying to explain, because some people did view Romero as winning that fight because when he did strike, he landed and he caused a bit of damage, so, but then it's what value do you place on leg kicks? Because Adesanya absolutely destroyed Yoel Romero's front leg with kicks to the outside, kicks to the inside. That's what he was doing when he was picking apart after he made the adjustment. He just started kicking the fuck out of Romero's leg. So what value do you place on kicks? And it's a nightmare. It's a shit show. So I've got no idea, straight up. But that's when you just rely on your eye. If you're trying to assess the fight, which I don't really tend to do. I just try and enjoy, and then whoever wins, whatever.
Yeah, so that's sort of effectively what I was bleeding to as well. So, because if you're, I don't know, it's to watch a fight, a boxing fight, it's pretty easy to, not easy, but it's definitely easier because you're just watching the gloves, you're seeing who's hitting who, you can tell a clean punch. But then with this fight, I was definitely in that same boat of even not even the same boat. I was further out at sea. I don't really know what's going on here. Is that one big heavy left that Adesanya copped in the first round, and there were once or twice where he sort of got roughed up, where he got a little bit too close in I think the second, maybe even once in the third. After that, it did seem like he was more in control, and the commentators seemed to think he was ahead and winning sort of thing. But I didn't. I mean, I had the sound off for most of the time, so I wasn't hardly listening to them anyway, because I was trying to... my main focus was on the Phoenix game, just in case they scored a goal at the time. But I'm pretty experienced at following multiple sports at once on double screening and even triple screening sometimes. I don't mean to brag, but sign of the times. So I didn't know if he was winning or not. I couldn't tell, and that thing about the leg kicks was the main one. I'm like, so if you're scoring equal value to that, this is exactly what I was thinking at the time. Like, if you're putting equal value on that as you are to everything else, it just seems so easy for Adesanya. It seemed like he must have been cruising because he was just popping the fella over. Like, do you see the dude's leg? Romero's leg afterwards was wrecked. Like, that's just because Adesanya has just been hacking at it all day. And that, if that is on an equal par, then it seemed like he must have cruised, but I didn't know if that would be the case or not. I didn't know if that was going to get the same whatever. It's just... Yeah, it was a tricky one to watch because I had no idea how they were going to call it afterwards because I had no idea how they were scoring it during it. But it seems like, even Romero afterwards, he wasn't doing the standard boxing thing of being like, judges screwed me here, I should have won. He was just like, why wasn't he more aggressive? And I can understand that because it seemed like that was his plan, was that he wanted to be the counter-attacking guy, of just draw Adesanya in and then destroy him. And so from that point of view, it seemed like Adesanya did exactly what he needed to do by just just touching him up from a distance and not overcommitting and not putting himself in danger and not getting into those real tricky highlight reel type situations. So, it seemed from that, given the result and given how the conversation has been about the fight afterwards, it seems like Adesanya just did exactly what he needed to do, and perfectly. And it's weird, the general kind of the narrative of what a terrible fight this was, and the title fight didn't live up to expectations, and you've even got old mate Dana saying this, and you've got fighters acknowledging it, and it's just, I don't know, it's a little strange one, which is, I guess, because of that whole UFC bubble that it has, because it is a self-contained thing. You don't get so many rival political kind of aspects to it. Everyone's just a little more honest and open about things, which is refreshing and also just weird. So it's kind of a strange mix of those. But yeah, it was definitely an experience to catch that one.
Yeah, there's all sorts of weeds that we could get into there. And I actually think back to Dan Hooker's recent fight against Paul Felder, which was very, very, very even. But late in the fight, Dan Hooker had a takedown, which could have been viewed by some people as skewing the fight in Dan Hooker's favor. But the takedown, you're getting into one thing I've actually been pondering, we don't need to talk about this here, maybe this is a good one for the Patreon, but the gray area of sports where you have baseball has all of these where stuff isn't illegal, but it's frowned upon, cricket has it with the man-cat and all sorts of other things. There's stuff like this where you've got theories and ideas that may be true but aren't actually factually true, and that is very evident in MMA, where it's if you're in a title fight, you can only use your in this situation, Romero needed to go out and win the bout. You don't win the bout by shelling up and doing nothing. So it's all, sports is full of all sorts of gray areas, and also little myths and theories that seep their way into truth but aren't actually true. It's a very weird equation there, Wildcard.
Let's for sure pencil that down for a Patreon podcast, though, because we could go in some areas there. Yes.
As far as offering insight and value as to what we learned about Israel Adesanya, it was the fact that he got the win in niggly circumstance, which is great for him. He now fights Paulo Costa, and a lot of the noise after this fight is that Paulo Costa's someone Paulo Costa defeated Yoel Romero and did so in brutal fashion. That was a great fight because Paulo Costa he's going to go at Adesanya. And so that's just going to be an exciting fight. So Adesanya can quickly transition into looking forward to that fight. Another little thing here is that we saw more of Israel Adesanya's takedown defense. There were a couple instances where Romero did try to take down Adesanya. One stands to mind where Adesanya, and this is an Olympic level wrestler trying to take down Adesanya. I'm not 3,000% sure that these takedowns were like super intense, because Yoel Romero was like all over the show. He was just acting weird throughout the whole fight. So I don't know what he was up to, but like I've seen this throughout Adesanya's career where he is very difficult to take down. So if you're a striker and you have an excellent takedown defense, which can come in the form of like dropping your hips to the mat, getting your legs back, so your opponent can't grab onto your legs and there's not much leverage there. Romero lunged forward with like a flurry attack at Adesanya at various points, and this is where it looked like Adesanya was running, because he was literally running away from Romero because he was getting backed up against the cage. But the point is that Adesanya escaped those attempts. He escaped those flurries, and then he nullified any takedown attempts. And when you're dealing with a striker of Adesanya's quality, to have that takedown defense, like his coming up through the UFC, he was fighting wrestlers. Marvin Vettori, Brad Tavares, Robert Whittaker was a Commonwealth Games qualified wrestler himself. Derek Brunson, bit of a wrestler as well. So he has consistently shown throughout his UFC career the ability to deal with those guys who are going to throw takedowns at him. And that was reinforced against Yoel Romero, which is a low-key thing, because shout out to the City Kickboxing guys that were in his corner. You had Eugene Behrman, Mike Angrove, you had Andre Paulette and Tristram Apakatoa, I think, who was otherwise known as Twist. But the City Kickboxing has a reputation for striking, but I've seen consistently with Adesanya, and then you look at other City Kickboxing fighters like Brad Riddell, Kai Kara-France, Dan Hooker, they all have really good wrestling. They all have really good defensive strategies to deal with guys taking them down, and they're going to be eager to, in the right circumstances. Dan Hooker had a good takedown against Paul Felder, so they can attack with their grappling as well. So for Kiwi sports fans, like, City Kickboxing is breeding fighters who are extremely well-rounded. They have an international reputation of breaking boundaries with their striking, with feints, with switching stances and punches, elbows, kicks. Like, the whole smorgasbord of their striking is brilliant. However, beneath that radar, as I've seen with Adesanya throughout his whole UFC career, and now more recently against the best in the division, City Kickboxing is producing well-rounded MMA fighters who can deal with those fighters who might want to take them down, might want to wrestle, and execute some jiu-jitsu with them as well. So it's an undercover tick for City Kickboxing with how they develop extremely well-rounded fighters. And just the last note on that, so Andre Paulette is I think he was like a Commonwealth Games wrestler for New Zealand. I think he's French maybe, or this is terrible, I should know. He's part of the New Zealand Olympic wrestling team, freestyle wrestling, which is good for him. He went to the Delhi Commonwealth Games. But they also have a guy, there's the Hickman brothers, who are coaches at Tiger Muay Thai in Thailand, and through long relationships with guys like Dan Hooker, Brad Riddell, Kai Kara-France, who have gone to Thailand to train, within the last 10 years. That's been a constant relationship. But now I've been watching a lot of content, and one of the Hickman brothers, I think Frank Hickman, has been spending a lot of time at City Kickboxing, and he's a very good wrestling coach as well. So I think big shout out to Andre Paulette and the Hickman brothers for helping City Kickboxing build these well-rounded fighters.
Yeah, I did actually jot down. I was going to ask you about Adesanya's defense and how it's sort of acknowledged, because it seemed to me, just as an amateur watching on, that was particularly in the last couple rounds, like kind of a defining factor was just how elusive he seemed in those moments. And yeah, you've already answered that question. The only other thing I was going to say is that this sort of, I guess it kind of crosses over with those sort of gentlemanly conduct and myths and routines and stuff and sports, which is that idea about how and this is the thing that people have said the most to defend Adesanya based on the quality of the fight, was that it's not his job to, as the champion, it's not his job to be the guy dictating things. That's the challenger's job, is to fight on the front foot and all those, which I don't know, I just struggle with the idea of that. I understand it from a literal perspective, because obviously the challenger is the one who has to come out and win the belt, rather than like the guy who's just defending it. When you just think about the logic of those two, just the wording used there, like winning versus defending, it's clearly like a different perspective. But I mean, I think a lot of people are just, sometimes fights aren't that interesting, especially title fights. Sometimes grand finals in other sports just aren't that interesting. Sometimes, whatever, like sport in general, sometimes it just peters out to a little draw, or maybe the entertainment value isn't of the same level, and that's just the way it goes. Like sometimes you just get a fight like this, which is more what I was thinking. I don't really understand why anyone needs to defend Adesanya or criticize Romero. I mean, you criticize Romero because he lost. Like, that's why you don't criticize him for the entertainment value of the fight necessarily, because the only reason that was a problem is because he didn't win. And that's where the criticism comes. The result, purely. Like, how you got to that result only matters with that, like, hindsight vision of the approach and whatever and how it played out. But I don't think Adesanya needs criticism for the way of the fight. I don't think Romero does. Don't think either of them need to be defended for their tactics either. It's just kind of fascinating how two different fighters always like address things, and sometimes the tactical battle is more than the physical battle, and that just is that's just the nature of sport in general. And if sometimes you don't get, as a fan, the most entertaining fight that you expected, well, tough tits. That's kind of the way it goes.
Tough titties indeed. The final thing here is just for starters, Adesanya he did an interview with Ariel Helwani just prior to us recording this, and just hearing him be vulnerable, hearing him express his emotions, and he is an inspiration for young Kiwis. And young people around the world. Like, the way he goes about his work people should take inspiration from the way he speaks, from what he speaks about, to the person that he is. And there was I just settled on a nice little split here. He had an entrance, a walkout, which was very, like his previous, against Rob Whittaker, he came out with his friends from either Rotorua or Wanganui, and he did a dance routine with them, and that was great. And then he smoked Robert Whittaker. This fight, there was a Nigerian focus to his entrance, which was beautiful. Like, Israel Adesanya isn't just one of the top 3 UFC stars in the whole world at the moment. He is also he is the king of the walkout in the UFC, which needs to be highlighted. But the way he won that fight, to me, it resonated with me as a Kiwi. That's what Kiwis do. Like, it just felt like a naturally Kiwi scenario when you're coming up against someone who has a bit more flair. They've got a bit more, and you can say Latino because the way Yoel Romero from Cuba, Central America, but there's a Latino element, the passion and the just the slightly unpredictable nature of their actions. That's not really a Kiwi way of operating, which I think is very understandable and clear for listeners to, like, there's a very large, as someone who lived in Chile, there's a very large disparity between how Kiwis operate and how people from South America and Central America operate. It was evident in Israel Adesanya dealing with adversity, dealing with a crazy scenario, and he just did what was required to win. And Kiwis around the world are reliable for getting the job done. That's what we do. That's how we operate. You go anywhere around the world where Kiwis have worked over a long period of time, and Kiwis get the job done. It's the Kiwi ingenuity. It's the Kiwi DIY nature. We get the job done. We can be trusted to get the job done. We can be relied on to get the job done. Whatever you need, whatever scenario you throw, we adapt and we get the job done without any fuss. And ultimately, to me, that's what resonated with Israel Adesanya in this fight. That was the joy of the fight. Was from an entertainment standpoint, there wasn't much action, but from an entertainment and viewing experience from someone living in Aotearoa, born and raised in Aotearoa, it was watching a Kiwi deal with that unique little weird scenario and still get the job done. It was a beautiful thing.
Who would you have higher on the walkout, ultimate worldwide walkout rankings between Israel Adesanya versus Tyson Fury coming out wearing a crown on his head with a cape, literally being carried on a throne?
On the basis of boxing being far more familiar with those type of walkouts, I'll say Israel Adesanya, because Israel Adesanya, like there's been other UFC fighters who have put a lot of effort and intention with their walkouts, but Israel Adesanya, in the space of 2 years, has kind of changed that paradigm already. Whereas the Tyson Fury walkout came with the Deontay Wilder walkout, and it's like...
Which Deontay Wilder then blamed for losing.
Yeah, at that level of heavyweight boxing, and that level of boxing, I don't know, maybe the heavyweights just have a bit more pizzazz and a bit more personality. I feel like it's to be expected. And you had two fighters doing a similar thing in the same fight. No one's going to match Israel Adesanya in the walkout stakes coming up against him. And I think he has shifted. Like, again, throughout the UFC, there's been interesting walkouts, but especially recently, it kind of just settled into a stock standard kind of bracket. And the UFC are to blame because they are quite restrictive of the walkout process. But there's no one else doing what Adesanya does. And yeah, I think in boxing it's far more accepted and widespread. So I'm going to go with Adesanya.
Yeah, I've never seen anything near as extravagant as that Fury-Wilder fight with the two walkouts. I mean, I can think of Anthony Joshua when he fought Joseph Parker, and I think that was that at Wembley or in Cardiff? I can't remember. It was at a big football stadium, and he came out and they lifted him up onto like a platform so that he could stand in front of the crowd like 10 feet off the ground, and it was pretty wanky. But obviously the Deontay Wilder walkout was ridiculous. He's famous for his masks, but he took that one a little bit too far and then moaned about it afterwards. You don't often see the big extravagant walkouts as often as you'd think. It tends to just be a title fight thing, and at that point I think you've earned that right to do whatever you want. Normally it's just people talk about the song they walk out to. Joseph Parker's always got quite a cool, he's got his like cultural procession type thing that he does with a lot of his family and followers and stuff walking out with him, and that is always quite cool. What I like about that is that it's very Joseph Parker, and I think that's why, I'm going with Izzy as well versus Tyson Fury, but what I love about Joseph Parker's one, as I was just saying, but then especially to Adesanya and Tyson Fury, what I love about their two the extravagances of their walkouts is that it's so reflective of them. Like, it's their personalities just... not even unleashed, because they're two guys who you couldn't put them in a box if you tried, but like it's so reflective of who they are, and I think that's exactly what you want. If you're going to go the big 9 yards, like, you don't have to. There's nothing wrong with just walking out casually to a good tune and then just like, clicking your neck a few times, punching your fists together and getting ready to go. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever, but if you are going to go the full 9 yards, that's what you want, is something that really like tells a story. And
most importantly, authenticity. Whatever
Exactly.
you're doing has to be authentic to you and who you are. So, bit of authenticity never hurt nobody.